US State Department finds 5 Israeli military units responsible for gross violations of human rights in individual incidents. However, says they will continue to receive military backing. United Nations top court set rule Tuesday on charges by Nicaragua against Germany for breaching 1948 Genocide Convention by supplying arms to Israel. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken departs Saudi for Jordan, where he will discuss ways to boost aid deliveries into Gaza and quietly thank the kingdom for its help during recent Iran-Israel clashes. Philippines Coast Guard accuses Chinese counterparts of harassment and damaging one of its boats with water cannons in disputed South China Sea. Rent in London continues to climb. Average rental now stands at £2,633 per month. Prices continue to rise for the 17th consecutive month. The Los Angeles Lakers are knocked out of the playoffs by defending champions Denver Nuggets. LeBron James refuses to answer questions about his retirement after the defeat.
Zeros on the clock, the Nuggets and the defense of their but this one is going to send.
British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's pet policy, sending asylum seekers to Rwanda, has hit another potential roadblock. This time, the Home Office has admitted that they can't find thousands of migrants who are set to be deported to Rwanda. According to an updated document, the East African country of Rwanda has agreed to accept 5,700 people. But out of these people identified for removal, over 3,500 are missing. UK's Home Office says these migrants may not have absconded, but are not subject to reporting restrictions, which means they cannot be located for detention. Only over 2,000 continue to report, and their whereabouts are known. However, according to reports, the Home Office fears that there's significant risk that the migrants might have absconded, despite the department relying on the incentive of free accommodation and some $60 a week allowance to prevent people from doing just that. Well, the Home Office also acknowledges that there could be further delays to deportations caused by MPs making last-minute representations to suspend removals. Well, meanwhile, the Prime Minister Sunak has rejected the idea of accepting the return of asylum seekers from Ireland amid concerns the policy was driving migrants across the border into the Republic. Sunak said that he was not interested in a returns deal if the European Union did not allow the UK to send back asylum seekers who'd have crossed the English Channel from France.
Can you get a return scheme with Ireland, do you think?
I'm not interested in that. We're not going to accept returns from the EU via Ireland when the EU doesn't accept returns back to France where illegal migrants are coming from. Of course we're not going to do that. I'm determined to get our Rwanda scheme up and running because I want a deterrent. I want it to be the case.
Well, for more on this, we're being joined by our correspondent John Bevere from London. John, quite a concerning situation here for the Home Office. What are they saying and what efforts are going into place to find these missing migrants?
Well, this policy was never going to be straightforward, was it? It's been mired in controversy since it was first announced, and that controversy, everything from human rights grounds to the cost of it. And now we have this issue when it comes to the actual logistics of it. The government tried to put a brave face on this, of course, saying that they think that their Rwanda policy, as they call it, is going to be effective in putting people off coming here. But this specific problem is about migrants who are already in the country. So, of course, it is an issue in terms of finding them. As you mentioned, some of these migrants have got to report in and might be staying in free accommodation. And so those migrants are relatively easy to keep track of. But for others who are staying in their own accommodation, they could even be staying with friends or family, while keeping in a track of them is a lot harder. So the government faces this big problem in terms of finding people who simply drop off the grid. And of course, if people are faced with the prospect of going to Rwanda, they might decide to try and stay in the UK illegally anyway, realise that they will lose their rights to any income that they might have been able to get. They won't legally be allowed to work, of course, if they're in the UK illegally, but they might think that is better rather than going to Rwanda. So that is a big problem that the Home Office faces. We've been hearing as well there could be more delays as MPs try and oppose this policy. And then we have this issue with Ireland as well, with the UK saying it won't allow Ireland to send back migrants from Ireland to Northern Ireland, saying quite simply a lot of these migrants have come from France. France and Ireland are both in the EU, so if France won't take back migrants, well, the UK say that they won't take back migrants either. So a very complex issue, a huge number of issues to be dealt with, and all of this really a headache for the Prime Minister, but he says he's going to very much stick with his policy.
Yeah, certainly a complex one I'm sure we'll be discussing for many weeks and months to come. John Bevere, our correspondent, joining us there live from London. Many thanks. Now, there's a power vacuum in Scotland. The resignation of Scotland's first ethnic minority leader, Humza Yousaf, has pushed the country back into political turmoil. This as the Scottish National Party begins another leadership contest. The battle for leadership comes just 4 days after Yousaf axed the SNP's ties with the Scottish Greens. Well, last week's snap provoked a backlash from his former partners. Yousaf has acknowledged that he underestimated the fury that his actions would provoke. Amidst a lookout for a successor to Humza Yousaf, it's provided the opposition Labour Party with an opening to make deep strides back into SNP territory at the UK general election. Labour believes it will enjoy a significant boost from the chaos engulfing the SNP. Starmer's party, which has just got two MPs north of the border, hopes that it could once again become the majority party in Scotland after the general election. According to a poll by YouGov, the Labour Party is now a point ahead of the SNP in Scotland, and if Labour manages to outshine the SNP, then it would bring an end to nearly 20 years of SNP dominance in Scotland and provide a significant boost to Starmer, who seeks to win a landslide majority in Westminster.
Your Majesty, I sincere condolences.
In 2 days from now, on May the 2nd, Londoners are all set to elect a new mayor and members for the Assembly. But before they do, Delhi-born businessman Tarun Gulati has surfaced as a contender against the incumbent Sadiq Khan for the election. The 63-year-old is the only Indian origin candidate among the 13 individuals competing for the position of mayor. Standing as an independent candidate, he's putting his best foot forward for the position, relying on his broad support network and financial understanding to try and clinch victory. The mayoral candidate of Indian descent says he aspires to manage London like a seasoned CEO. For Gulati, safety on the streets of the city is among his other major priorities, with visible community policing and more officers patrolling on the beat. Britain's National Crime Agency has issued a rare alert to hundreds of thousands of teachers in the country following a considerable increase in cases of sexual extortion, a type of online blackmail widely known as sextortion. The NCA says there's been a global rise in sextortion cases where people are threatened with the release of compromising photos, either real or faked, if they do not pay or stop them. According to the law enforcement agency, gangs based in some West African countries and Southeast Asia are thought to be targeting young people across the UK, US, Australia, New Zealand and Canada. The agency says that they often pose as another young person, and after making contact on social media, they then move the conversation to encrypted messaging apps and encourage the victim to share intimate images. According to the NCA's Director General for Threats, sextortion is a callous crime. Perpetrators have no concern for victims or the lives that might be destroyed in the process. Their sole motivation is financial gain. But while all age groups are at risk, the UK's law enforcement agency says the large proportion of cases that have been reported involve teenage boys, due to which the NCA has now given advice to teachers about how to spot the signs of abuse. The document includes advice for parents and carers on how to talk to children about sextortion and how to support them if they become a victim. It suggests that victims should stop communication, block the offender, and do not give them any money. The alert by the NCA comes after a 16-year-old teenager of a private school became a victim of sextortion, who later killed himself after he was blackmailed on a social media application over compromising photos.
In mind since the or post to your story, which is a collection of the snaps you've taken.
More pain for tenants in London. The cost of average advertised rental properties coming onto the market continues to balloon, especially in London. According to new data by the property platform Rightmove, average rental prices in the capital reached a new record of £2,633 per calendar month. Well, the latest data shows that rental prices have reached new records for the 17th consecutive month across the country. Despite the fact that average prices are now 8.5% higher than a year ago, there is potential relief on the horizon. The pace of rent growth has dropped for the second quarter in a row, with London experiencing a more significant pace of slowing rental growth than the rest of the country. Average rents in the capital are now 5.3% higher than last year, and that puts the average rental prices in the capital at a record £2,600. Although the balance of supply and demand is slowly improving from its peak, there are still nearly 50,000 more rental properties needed to reach the pre-pandemic level of rental supply in the UK. While the rise of rental price continues to rise, tenants in the UK find some relief in the fact that rent growth has slowed. That's another sign that inflation may be retreating in the UK. Israel is set to send a delegation to Cairo for talks with Hamas on a new ceasefire proposal in the Gaza Strip. The delegation will be comprised of security officials. Well, earlier the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken discussed the urgent need to reduce tensions in West Asia as he met with the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Blinken highlighted that the utmost need of the hour is to achieve a ceasefire and that Washington will continue efforts in this regard.
Hamas has before it a proposal that is extraordinarily generous on the part of Israel. And in this moment, the only thing standing between the people of Gaza and a ceasefire is Hamas. They have to decide, and they have to decide quickly.
Blinken also underscored the need for sustaining an increase in humanitarian assistance to Gaza. The Hamas delegation will return to Cairo with a response on the Gaza truce. Earlier negotiations for Hamas met Qatari and Egyptian mediators about the phased ceasefire proposal Israel presented over the weekend. Israel's proposal involved the release of fewer than 40 of the roughly 130 hostages believed to still be held in Gaza. In exchange, Palestinians jailed in Israel would be freed. The second phase of the truce would consist of a period of sustained calm, which is Israel's compromise response to a Hamas demand for a permanent ceasefire. Meanwhile, President Biden, on a phone call with his Egyptian counterpart Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, discussed the deal to secure the release of hostages together with an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Biden confirmed that the US, together with Egypt and Qatar, would work to ensure the full implementation of its terms. Amidst the negotiations, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is facing pressure on multiple fronts. Israel's voicing concern that the International Criminal Court could be preparing to issue an arrest warrant for government officials on charges related to the conduct of its war against Hamas. Prosecutors from the ICC interviewed staff from Gaza's two biggest hospitals about possible crimes in the Gaza Strip. Netanyahu is also facing pressure from far-right allies to reject a new Gaza ceasefire, jeopardising his government's stability. On the other hand, thousands of protesters rallied in Tel Aviv, demanding the release of around 130 hostages still held in Gaza. Protesters scuffled with Israeli police after blocking roads in the city, while 5 protesters were arrested. Meanwhile, in the US, Columbia University has begun suspending pro-Palestinian activists who refused to dismantle a tent encampment on its New York City campus. This came after the Ivy League school declared a stalemate in talks seeking to end the polarising protest. Protesters are demanding a ceasefire in the war with Hamas and the divestment of university assets in companies involved with the Israeli military, and an end to US military assistance to Israel. Well, for more on this, our correspondent Jodie Cohen has sent us this report from Rwanda.
So perhaps the most important factor is the IDF build-up of troops by southern Gaza. Remember, Foreign Minister Cant said that Israel would delay its planned operation in Rafah to target the final Hamas battalions if Hamas releases some of the 133 hostages as part of the deal. On the other hand, Israel has said that if Hamas rejects the latest offer, they would move ahead in Rafah. So perhaps the threat of Hamas being defeated has brought them back to the talks. There's also public pressure being applied to Hamas. We've seen the regional alliance unite against Iran's attack on Israel, showing Hamas that Israel is not as isolated as Hamas thought. 18 countries then jointly called on Hamas to free the hostages immediately, and the US pressured Qatar to put pressure on Hamas to release the hostages, with reports that Hamas leaders who live in Doha, not Gaza, could have to move. And President Biden and Secretary of State Blinken have publicly suggested that the only thing standing in the way of a ceasefire is Hamas. So perhaps the increased military and public pressure could perhaps lead Hamas to agree to a deal this time.
After being diagnosed with cancer, King Charles III is making his first public appearance today. His doctors say they're very encouraged by the progress of his treatment. According to the palace, Charles, along with his wife, Queen Camilla, will tour a cancer treatment facility to meet medical specialists and patients. 75-year-old Charles he suspended his public duties back in February after the cancer diagnosis. Earlier, he was being treated for an enlarged prostate. But the exact nature of his cancer has not been disclosed. In a planned engagement, the British head of state will raise awareness of the importance of early cancer diagnosis in the coming weeks. The King is the patron of Cancer Research UK and Macmillan Cancer Support, while the Queen is the president of Maggie's, another cancer support charity. The King's treatment as an outpatient will continue, but his schedule in the coming weeks will be reduced as per the medical advice. In June, King Charles will be hosting the Japanese Emperor Naruhito and Empress Masako during their state visit to the United Kingdom. Charles succeeded his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, in September 2022 and was officially crowned king on May the 6th last year.